Hi everybody. Today we'll be talking about the heart, so let's get started. First slide showing you an overview of the cardiovascular system. We've got the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. These are important concepts for you to be able to grasp, that the pulmonary circuit is, whilst connected to the whole cardiovascular system, is a separate circulation system which involves the heart sending blood to the lungs to be reoxygenated, and then that blood returning back to the heart to be pumped off to what is the systemic circulation. So let's look at where the heart is actually located. This will help you with your health assessment. It sits within the thoracic cavity. Remember, one of the functions of the skeleton is to provide protection. Between the lungs it sits, and it's posterior behind the sternum. It's in the mediastinum, it's in the middle, and it rests superior on top of the diaphragm. To locate it, if you were wanting to locate the apex of the heart, it's in the 5th intercostal space, 5 centimeters from the midline. So you'll need to be aware of that position, and remember that if you were asked to auscultate the apical beat of the heart. There are 4 chambers in the heart, the left and right sides. So we have the right atrium, which receives blood from the systemic circulation. So this is deoxygenated blood. Then that right ventricle. So blood drains from the atrium into the right ventricle, which pumps blood to the pulmonary circulation. So this is deoxygenated blood off to the lungs to be reoxygenated. That blood then returns via the left atrium from the pulmonary circuit, and then the blood goes down into the left ventricle, and then it's pumped off to the rest of the system. Here's a very clear diagram of the way that blood moves around the heart. You can see the 2 tubes that are entering the right atrium, the superior and the inferior vena cava. Blood enters the right atrium. This is blood coming back from the systemic circulation, so it is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide, represented by the blue color of the vena cava. That blood then moves past the right AV valve, or the tricuspid valve, into the right atrium. The blood then moves out of the right atrium through the pulmonic valve, the pulmonary valve, off via the pulmonary trunk, and then the pulmonary trunk branches off into the left and right pulmonary arteries. These are the arteries carrying deoxygenated blood. Blood that travels away from the heart always travels in an artery. So arteries always travel away, so remember A for artery, A for away. Arteries travel away from the heart. These are going off to the lungs so the blood is going to be reoxygenated, and then it will return via the left and right pulmonary veins. So you can see there that the pulmonary veins, the left pulmonary veins, are the only veins in the body that are returning oxygenated blood to the heart. Veins always bring blood back to the heart, but in this case, because they're part of the pulmonary circulation, they're bringing back oxygenated blood. That oxygenated blood comes back by the left and right pulmonary veins, enters the left atrium, goes down through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, and then when the heart contracts, that blood then pushes up through the aortic valve and then off via the aortic arch to the rest of the body in the systemic circulation. So if we look at it in words, the pulmonary circuit, this begins at the pulmonary trunk. Blood leaves via the right ventricle and enters the pulmonary artery. It goes past the pulmonary semilunar valve. This is deoxygenated blood present in an artery. It's the only example, as blood is usually oxygenated, carrying in arteries. The left and right pulmonary arteries enter the lungs and branch numerous times. The pulmonary capillaries, down at the capillary beds around the alveoli, is where gas exchange occurs. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged, and the blood comes back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, the 4 pulmonary veins, enters the left atrium. Now it is full of oxygen, and again, these are the only examples of veins that are carrying oxygen-rich blood. So here's that diagram again, and you can see the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. The pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary arteries moving arteries going away from the heart are carrying deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary veins are bringing back oxygenated blood to the heart. The other part of the circulation is the systemic circulation, which provides blood to the rest of the entire system. And all of the arteries there are in a red colour, and all of the veins, again, arteries carrying blood away from the heart. In this case, it's oxygenated blood, and then the systemic veins all bring blood back to the heart in the systemic circulation. What we're looking at now is the fibrous capsule that the heart is resting in. You can see there that you've got the base of the heart, which is the top of the heart, and the apex of the heart, which is down the bottom, resting in that space in the mid 5 centimeters from the midline in the 5th intercostal space. Now the heart rests in a tight fibrous capsule known as the pericardium. There are 2 sides to the pericardium. There is the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. The visceral pericardium coats the heart muscle very closely, and the parietal pericardium is the other side of the pericardial sac. On the right-hand side, you can see the fist pushed into a balloon, which is demonstrating how the heart is sort of nestled within the pericardial sac. The circulation for the systemic circulation begins in the left ventricle, where freshly oxygenated blood is injected into the aorta, past the aortic semilunar valve, and this supplies blood to the vascular system that is not serviced by the pulmonary circuit. The aorta is the largest artery in the body, predominantly elastic fibers. It has to be because it has to absorb large pressures with each heartbeat. And we're going to learn more about this systolic and diastolic when we're measuring blood pressure. And this propels blood through the entire arterial circuit. You will need to know this sequence, that blood comes into the heart via the right atrium, goes down to the right ventricle, goes off to the lungs via the pulmonary arteries. The blood then returns from the lungs via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, goes down to the left ventricle, off to the aorta, off to the systemic circulation. Here is that diagram again. So you can see that blood enters the right atrium from the left and right inferior and superior vena cava. It goes down through the tricuspid valve into the right atrium. When the heart contracts, that blood is then forced up through the pulmonary valve, off to the pulmonary trunk, off to the left and right pulmonary arteries, off to the lungs to be reoxygenated. It then returns from the lungs via the left and right pulmonary veins, and these veins carrying oxygenated blood drain into the left atrium. The blood then goes down through the left AV mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the heart contracts, the left ventricle then squeezes the blood out through the aortic valve, through the aortic arch, and off to the rest of the systemic circulation. If we take a moment to look closely at how the cardiac muscle is actually constructed, the actual surface of the heart, you can see that the closest layer to being in contact with the actual blood is called the endocardium. The next layer is called the myocardium, and this is cardiac muscle. And the outside of the heart is called the pericardium. And next to that is the visceral layer called the visceral pericardium. So epi, meaning outside the cardiac layer. This is a layer of serous membrane, and it's continuous with the pericardial layer and is attached to the myocardium. The myocardium is a muscular layer. It's in the middle of the heart. It has specialized layers of concentric, so circular muscles and intercalated discs. The atria and ventricles have muscle bundles requiring a high blood supply, because remember, the heart has to beat for as long as we are alive. So it's important that the blood supply to the heart muscle is as rich in oxygen as it possibly can be. The endocardium is the inner layer of the cardiac layer, and this is the surface which is actually in direct contact with the blood as it is squeezing through the heart. And the pericardial sac surrounds the heart with two layers. The pericardial sac is filled with pericardial fluid, which provides lubrication to reduce friction between the heartbeats. And an abnormality that can occur is what is called pericarditis, where there is inflammation of that pericardial sac. Sometimes that inflammation can become so severe that the actual contraction of the heart is impeded. So how does the cardiac muscle work? Well, it works by innervation of these intercalated discs. So they're secured by dermisomes and they're linked by gap junctions, and they propagate action potentials. So here we've got a cross-section of the cardiac muscle. You can see that we've got the mitochondria, and there are numerous mitochondria because remember that's where glucose is changed into energy which can be used by the body, and of course the muscle needs a large amount of energy. So we've got the intercalated discs, which you can see at the end there. And if we look at the next picture, you can see these intercalated discs, and these provide the electrical innervation to the cardiac muscle. Here we've got a photograph of actual cardiac muscle, and you can see the presence of the intercalated discs here. The characteristics of cardiac muscle: it's small in size, it has a single central nucleus, and it has branching interconnections between cells, and the thing that is unique, of course, is these intercalated discs. There are differences in the myocardium between the left and right sides of the heart. So the difference in workload is revealed by the comparative anatomy when you compare the left and right sides of the heart. The walls of the left ventricle were 3 times as thick as those of the right ventricle. This is because the left ventricle has to generate high pressures to eject blood against all of the resistance that's found in the systemic circulation. So gravity, systemic blood pressure, viscosity of the blood, and the length of the systemic circulation. Whereas the right ventricle only has to pump blood. When I say only, its job is to pump blood to the pulmonary circulation. Therefore, there is less force required. And the atria have smaller muscles compared, of course, to the left and right ventricles. So here's a diagram showing you a cross-section through the heart, and you can see quite clearly that the left ventricle has far thicker muscles compared to the right ventricle. And here we have a diagram showing you when the heart is relaxed or dilated. So that is also known as diastole. D for diastole, D for dilated. And then the picture next to it is the heart when it's contracted. So you can see that the left ventricle can constrict quite tightly to make sure that the majority of the blood that is in the ventricle is pushed forward up through the aortic valve and out through the aorta to the systemic circulation. Now, what controls blood flow within the heart? Well, it's controlled by 4 valves. So we're going to look at these valves in a bit more detail now. So there are 2 semilunar ones and there are 2 atrioventricular ones. So atrioventricular, between the atria and the ventricles. The other 2 semilunar ones are involved in being attached to blood vessels that are directly taking blood out of the heart. The pressure in the chambers forces the valves to close and open. So here we've got a cross-section showing you when the ventricles are relaxed. So the left and right ventricles are relaxed, and the AV valves, the atrioventricular valves on the left and right sides of the heart, are open. When they're open, that means that the aortic and the pulmonary valve are closed because we don't want blood moving backwards. The way they close is because we've got piliary muscles and these tight strings called the chordae tennae. So the chordae tennae, and they play a vital role, and they prevent the leaves of the valve from being inverted. Here we've got a photograph where blood has been replaced by a clear solution. You can see the chordae tennae and the piliary muscles are pulled tight, the piliary muscle is stretched, and the valve is closed. The semilunar valves, you've got two semilunar valves. One is the pulmonary and the other is the aortic pulmonary semilunar valve, and these don't have any muscular support. They are based mainly on pressure and gravity, and they prevent backflow of blood when they're working well. Here you can see, again, when we've got the ventricles relaxed, that the left and right AV, the atrioventricular valves, are open. So the ventricles are relaxed, and at this stage the blood would be draining from the left and right atrium into the ventricles. Whilst they are filling with blood, of course we don't want blood moving back from the aorta or the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary artery, the pulmonary artery. So that's when the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve are closed. Here we've got just showing you the left atrium. So we've got blood coming back from the pulmonary circulation. Remember, it's coming back via the pulmonary veins. This is blood that is high in oxygen, and it's going out to the systemic circulation. So the chordae tennae are loose because the valve is open and the ventricle is filling with blood. And because the atrioventricular valve is open, that means correspondingly that the aortic valve is closed, because we don't want oxygen-rich blood travelling back into the heart. It's supposed to be moving outwards and going off to the systemic circulation. Here we can show you a photograph of the aortic valve actually being open. So this is when the heart is contracting, and you can see here that the left and right AV valves, the atrioventricular valves, are now closed, and whilst they're closed, that means that the aortic and the pulmonary valve must be open. So the ventricles are contracting and forcing blood out of the ventricles off to, the red one is going off to the systemic circulation, the aortic valve, and the pulmonary valve is pushing blood off to the pulmonary circuit to be reoxygenated. Part of your health assessment, you will be listening to heart sounds. You're getting an introduction to heart sounds, so we just want you to become familiar with S1 and S2. So S1 represents the closing of both of the atrioventricular valves. So this is the closing of the valves between the left and right atria going down to the ventricles. And it is the beginning of systole, the beginning of the ventricles contracting and the beginning of blood leaving the ventricles. The next sound that you'll hear is called a sharp dub, also known as S2, and it's the closure of both of the semilunar valves, and it's representing the beginning of diastole. So blood is now draining from both the left and right atria down into the ventricles, and the cycle is occurring again. You can see here that I've put down S3 and S4, but these are abnormal sounds, and it's really only for your interest. That cardiac auscultation, listening with a stethoscope to cardiac sounds, requires a large amount of training and practice. So what we'll be wanting you to do is just become familiar with S1 and S2. But if you become a registered nurse in the cardiovascular section in coronary care, then your practice at learning to hear sounds, what is normal and what is abnormal, of course will increase. So here we've got it graphically represented. So we've got the S1 sound, the lub, and the S2 sound. So the S1 sound is when the atrioventricular valves close. That's blood going that normally would drain from the atria, the left and right atria, into the left and right ventricles. So that closes, and then pressure is building up and the ventricles are contracting, and then you have the dub sound, which is the AV, the semilunar valves actually closing after the blood is squeezed out through the ventricles. So when you're listening to the heart, there are particular positions for you to place the diaphragm of your stethoscope. So you can look at this diagram and then use a family member with your stethoscope to actually pick up the loudness of the sound. So these particular points show you where on the heart you will most clearly hear the sounds of the valves opening and closing.